In February 2006, do you recall that there was a proposal by Gary Shea to add gays and lesbians to, or LGBT members to Rule 6?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall that there had been a DNC meeting prior to February 2006 in which you had indicated that that was a good idea?
Yes.
Okay. And the good idea, if I understand correctly, the good idea would be to establish goals and timetables for having gays and lesbians more fully included in the convention. Is that
yes.
right? Okay. And what Gary Shea proposed was that the LGBT community or gays and lesbians be included in Rule 6A. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point in time, you disagreed with that. Is that correct?
No, my role turned out to
at
be...
At some point in time, you didn't think that
was a good... I'm going to answer it. I'm used to much worse than this from Tim Russell.
Okay, at some point in time, you decided that wasn't a good strategy.
No, my decision was to be the mediator.
No, my question to you was...
He could say yes or no and then explain.
Did you say... Did you tell... Did you indicate to Tim McMahon at some point in time that you did not believe in numerical goals for gays and lesbians?
What I indicated...
No, did you ever indicate that to Tom McMahon?
What I indicated to Tom McMahon is that our job was to be the mediator and that we would stand between the disagreeing groups and bring them together.
Did you ever tell Tom McMahon that you were against numerical goals?
What I told Tom...
No, did you ever tell him that?
What I told Tom McMahon was...
No, numerical goals.
What I told Tom McMahon was that we were not able to agree with both sides entirely in the process of mediating.
Did you ever tell him you were not in favor of numerical goals?
What I told Tom McMahon
is... Or did you ever tell him that?
What I told him was that...
No, I don't want to hear everything you told him. Did you tell him that?
What I told him was that we were going to take a position in between the two positions. So
did you ever tell him that you were opposed to numerical goals?
What I told him was that we would take a position in between the positions so that we would effectively be able to mediate this dispute between two factions in the Democratic Party.
Let me show you what I'll ask to be marked as Exhibit 8, 9. Thank you. So it'd be fair to say that you were opposed to the Shea Amendment.
I was opposed. I took
because there was not a consensus.
Yeah, I was in the business of trying to bring
were you opposed to the Shea Amendment because there wasn't a consensus between...
I actually didn't oppose the Shea's amendment. What I opposed was a harsh... I take that back. What I opposed was a particular point of view that was at one end of the spectrum. Because it was at one end of the spectrum, I also opposed the other end of the spectrum so we could come together, and I might add, come to an incredibly successful solution. As a result of what I did, we now have 3 times as many states with inclusion programs for gay and lesbian delegates. 47 states as opposed to 16 when I got there.
But it's fair to say that those are not mandatory.
It's fair to say they are mandatory because
they don't have to meet those goals.
Yes, 47 states.
There's no requirement that they meet the goals they put in the plan.
Oh, yes, there is. There most certainly
object.
It's not true.
What you're representing to the witness is absolutely false.
Well, we'll get to that.
Well.
Okay, now if
you're arguing with them based.
What is radical about the Shea Amendment?
Nothing's radical about the Shea Amendment.
You just said that it was one radical point of view. What was radical? I
said there was one extreme and there was another extreme.
So what is the extreme represented by the Shea Amendment?
The extreme was that it was at one end of the argument.
What is the extreme?
There is.
Why was it
extreme? I think you're mischaracterizing the word extreme as I use it.
Why did you call the Shea Amendment as Mr. Shea proposed it? That would be mandatory goals and timelines for inclusion of gays and lesbians. Why was that extreme?
It wasn't extreme. It was at one end of the spectrum.
Okay, and why would you consider that an extreme end of the spectrum?
It wasn't. I didn't say that. There are 2 ends of a spectrum. Perhaps I shouldn't use the word extreme. When there are 2 ends of a spectrum and somebody has to mediate, you generally need to bring the parties to the middle, which is what we did, resulting in an enormous increase amount of gay delegates to the Democratic National Convention.
What are the 2 extremes?
Gary's was at one end, and the position was that there'd be no change of any kind was at the other end.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that the LGBT caucus had one position and the Black caucus had the other position?
Better spoken than I. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, well, I don't know about the Black caucus. I don't think the Black caucus ever took a vote on it. Now, you could all correct me if I'm mistaken, but
who took the position of no change?
There were influential individuals in the Black caucus who did take a position. Donna Brazil was one of them.
That there should be no
That
change.
there should be no change.
Okay, anybody else in the Black Caucus?
I'm sure there were, but I don't recall who they were.
Okay, so Donna Brazil and other members of the Black Caucus took position.
Some took, right. I don't believe the caucus ever took a position on this. Do you recall that?
I'm just asking you, okay. The communities or constituencies that are now listed in Rule 6 include African American, Hispanic, women, and Asian Pacific Islanders.
Sounds right to me.
Okay, and Gary Shea's amendment was original proposed amendment was to include gays and lesbians in that group, right? Mm-hmm. You have to
Yes,
verbal
yes,
response.
yes.
And that would mean that the state parties would have to have goals and timetables or suffer possibly certain kinds of penalties.
That's right.
Now, if you know, did you ever what discussions did you have with Mr. McMahon about the delegate selection in this amendment after Gary Shea's originally proposed it?
I don't understand your question.
What discussions did you have with Mr. McMahon about whether it was a good thing, a bad thing, indifferent?
The biggest problem that we had was we had two very important groups of people in the DNC disagreeing with each other about a matter which was very important. And so I don't recall any discussions about delegate selection. We weren't interested in that. What we were interested in is making peace between the folks that disagreed strongly over this issue and preserving equal rights for every American.
And when did you come to learn that there was a tension or some discord between the two caucuses?
I can't give you a date, but it happened in a hurry.
Okay, and do you know whether it happened, was it at or near the time of this Blight article?
I don't remember.
You don't recall?
It'd be easy to figure that out, but I don't have that dates
Okay.
in front of me.
And what was the goal of peace? I mean, what did you think? What did you want to achieve?
I wanted equal representation for gay and lesbian Americans, and I wanted to achieve it in a way that wasn't offensive to the history of the civil rights movement.
And I mean, you're familiar. You're not a lawyer, right?
No.
But you are familiar with the concept of separate but equal.
Yes.
Okay. And isn't it true that what the compromise that ultimately came about was separate? Just let's leave it separate. Whether it's equal or not is controversial.
That's true.
Okay. And it's fair to say that there's a Rule 7 now that requires state parties to have goals for inclusion of gays and lesbians, right?
Yes.
Okay. And those state parties may have goals, but don't necessarily have to fulfill those goals.
Yes, they do.
Well, if they don't fulfill the goals, that wouldn't necessarily, they would not necessarily be sanctioned, is that
If
right?
they accept the goals, they have to fulfill them.
But if they don't fulfill the goals, they may still be seated, is that right?
Well, they could be, and so could anybody. They could also be punished.
Okay, but it's not mandatory in the sense that they don't have to fill the goals or not be seated.
I think they do have to fill the goals. I don't know what the penalty is, but I think if they don't fulfill the goals they set, they have a big problem. I can't tell you what the penalty is off the top of my head.
Okay, but the penalty is not necessarily not to be seated.
I don't know what the penalty is.
Okay. Do you recall having discussions with the people in the Mississippi State Party about the goals for LGBT members?
I do recall calling the state chairman and asking to adopt goals.
And do you recall the state chairman indicated he didn't want to do that?
Yes.
And didn't you tell him just set the goal? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to meet it.
I most certainly said no such thing.